Good morning, boys and girls. We're going to do our second lesson in reading fundamentals today. Yesterday, Miss Abrams did a lesson about Reader's Workshop and how we're going to do Reader's Workshop remotely and how, we're going to make reading a part of our lives every day, even if we're not at school. We want to make sure that we carve out that 20 minutes of reading time. So today I'm going to share a lesson about learning about ourselves as readers. I'm going to read a book called The Lonely Book. And the third thing you're going to do is an independent activity where you're going to share your reading interests with us as teachers. And that information from the reading interest inventories or surveys, that's going to help us with our small groups because we're going to read books independently, but then we want to share what we learned from those books, and we want to share our feelings about those books, and we want to share what we liked and what we didn't like. And so hopefully that inspires us to have this reading life. The book that I read this summer was called The Book Whisperer, and it was about making sure that kids created reading habits that they carried with them into being adults, and so that as an adult you become a reader, you continue to be a reader just like you were when you were a child. All right, so I'm going to get started on the lesson. When we read a text, when we read a book, one of the most important strategies that we can use to help make meaning is to make a personal connection to that book. So we want to think about how the details in the text relate to our own lives, or they relate to our own experiences. We all have experiences as readers that shape our reading lives. And by the time you're, now a fourth grader, you've experienced many memorable moments in life. You've got things that you can think, memories that you can think back on. And they're going to stay in your heart and your mind forever. So have you ever thought about your memories as a reader? Have you ever stopped to think about special books in your lives, the ones that have cast a spell over you so that those books stay in your hearts and minds forever? So today our story is called The Lonely Book. It's a story about an enchanting book that touches one little girl's heart and how she never stops loving it. So here we go, The Lonely Book. Once there was a brand new book that arrived at the library. It was green with a yellow ribbon to mark its pages. On its cover was a picture of a girl in the forest under a toadstool. The book found itself in the front of the library where the newest books were always placed. The librarian was busy every day with children, looking for books about everything in the world. And the moss green book about the girl in the forest was often chosen and taken home. Whenever the book was returned, it was placed back on the shelf where the newest books lived. There was a long list of children waiting for the book, and it hardly ever slept at the library. I'm kind of going through this right now. A lot of the books that my mom, who is my reading buddy, or the books that I have friends, everybody's like, oh, you got to read this book, you got to read this book. And so I'll go to the public library app and try to check it out, and it'll say, oh, there's a 6 months waiting period for this book. So this week I actually got 2 books from my holds list. So I'm excited to try to read those. As is the custom in libraries, after a time the book was moved to the children's section, along with the other well-loved books that were no longer new. But the book was still taken home often, and so it was still happy. Years and years passed, and after a while it seemed that only rarely the book would be checked out. Its cover was faded, and on one page the girl's brown patchwork dress was torn. The last page of the book was missing. More years passed, and now hardly ever would a child take the shabby book off the shelf, but it was still read with joy from time to time, and despite the book's worn appearance, its girl, toadstool, and story would always be enchanting. The book became lonely. Hmm. So I remember that certain books were very popular in my school library, and even now, I think, especially like a Battle of the book, those tend to be pretty popular. Or something new by a favorite author, like if J.K. Rowling came out with a new book, that one usually would be pretty popular. So books, especially books in series, where you're waiting for that author to put out the newest title in a series. Um, And so, but I never really thought about the books that nobody checks out. Makes me feel kind of sorry for those little books that aren't as popular. Then, one very bad night, the book found itself completely forgotten, dropped in a dark corner by a daydreaming child, and not even the librarian found it. The next morning, a little girl sat reading in the corner of the library where the book sadly slept. She felt it under the leg of her rocking chair and leaned down and picked it up. Turning its pages, she sighed. "Daddy," she whispered, and walked across to the fairy tale section. "This is the most beautiful book I've ever read. Can I take it home?" "Oh, I don't know, Alice," her father answered, reading a gigantic book almost bigger than himself. "It seems very fragile, and you already have so many books in your basket." But Alice put 3 new books back so that she was able to take the lonely book home, promising to be very careful with it. When the book saw Alice's room and the shelf where it would sleep, alongside so many familiar books from the library and some new books it had never met, it was very happy. For 6 nights in a row, Alice's father read the book at bedtime. And then after her light was turned out, she would read it herself by the light of the moon. On the last missing page, she always imagined a happy ending with some fairies dancing around the girl, around the toadstool. Now Alice slept with the green book under her pillow, the better to dream about it. So that really makes me smile because it makes me think of my own childhood. Um, I love the part where she falls asleep with the book in the bed and wants to dream about it. That's what a good story does. It makes you just want to stay with that book and just be with those characters. Um, and so that is something, having that book that you fall asleep with. It feels like a book that will create that special memory. When she went to school every morning, Alice gently tucked the book into her bag. One day, the book was even featured at show and tell. "This is from the library. It's a very old book about a girl and her life under a toadstool," Alice proudly said, and the book had never felt so beloved. The next week at the library, there was a special event. A princess and a lion greeted Alice and all the children when they arrived, and then ushered them into the listening room for a wonderful story about a princess and a lion. After the event, Alice selected The Princess and Lion storybook to check out. In her excitement, she forgot all about renewing the old book about the girl in the forest. But as soon as Alice arrived home, she remembered, "Oh, Daddy!" she cried. "I left my book at the library. Please, can we go back and get it?" "I'm sorry, Alice," her father replied. The library is closed now. I have to work all week. I promise I'll take you back next Saturday morning. I'm sure we'll find your friend the book there." The following Saturday, Alice rushed back to the children's section, but the faded green book wasn't there. The librarian looked and looked for it, but she couldn't find it either. A hard-working library volunteer had picked it up and, thinking it was meant for the book sale, had taken it down to the basement. There the lonely book sat, patiently waiting for something to happen. Alice found a lot of other books to borrow, but they weren't the same. Saturday after Saturday she looked, but her book was never there, and Alice missed it terribly. Oh no, I feel like she's lost one of her best friends. I hope they get reunited. And the lonely book missed Alice. Though all the books were kept tidy and safe in the basement, it was very dark, and the book was lonelier than it had ever been. Over time, Alice forgot about the book. Though she never really stopped loving it, it was replaced in her thoughts by other books, like a particularly sweet one about a seahorse in her sea home, and another mysterious one about ice and snow and glass. Meanwhile, at the library, volunteers occasionally came down to the basement to tend to the books or bring them new companions. Sometimes a volunteer would pick up the lonely book, leaf through its pages, and smile, remembering its marvelous toadstool. But the volunteers always put the book down with a sigh and left it behind, and the book grew lonelier and lonelier. Then came a day that the book would remember forever. One morning, it found itself being carried upstairs and placed in the shade of a tree. The book enjoyed the fresh air, and all day long people peered down at it with kind faces, and many children picked it up and turned its pages. Other books were taken away, tucked under people's arms, good books about all sorts of good things, such as faraway planets and talking dogs. Still none was quite as magical as the lonely book. Neither was any as ruined, which may have been why nobody took the lonely book home. As the sky darkened, it started to rain. Volunteers began to pack up the sail. If someone had looked closely at the lonely book's cover, they would have seen that the girl under the toadstool had started to cry. It wasn't long before the book heard a familiar voice. "I know it's here. I just know it is. I promise I'll hurry," the voice said breathlessly to the librarian. "Okay, sweetheart, because we have to get the books out of the rain," the librarian answered. Do you think it's Alice? It was. Yay. And then the book found itself in Alice's hands once again. "I knew I'd find you," Alice cried, gently touching the frayed yellow ribbon. "Oh, Alice, I was hoping you would come," said the librarian. "The book has been waiting for you. Please take it for free." "You know," she added, gazing at the book's cover with its little girl and the enchanted toadstool, "it was my favorite book too when I was young." Doesn't she look so happy? They're finally reunited. I wanted Alice to find that book just as much as she did. I love books that make me root for the main character, and and then I have the same feelings that they're having. So if a character feels sad, then I feel sad, or if a character is solves the puzzle or solves the mystery, then I'm like relieved and proud that I helped solve it. I feel like I helped solve it too. I just think it's so cool when a book does that. Back in Alice's room, the book felt sublime in its always and forever home. Carefully, Alice repaired the girl's torn dress with some tape and read the story out loud. I don't mind at all that this one is missing, she said, reaching the very last page. I know just what it says. And they lived happily ever after, of course.